Hello, and welcome to Birth Through the Veil. I'm Melissa Kamrudin, and this week I'm sharing with you Elena's third birth story. She shared her first two on episode 25 back in the fall, and she's here with another story, or her most recent birth story, and more wisdom. Elena is a story weaver. No prompting for details was required. She's a natural. You're gonna love it. Hey, welcome back again.
Yeah.
We're here for your next birth story. I loved your last ones.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back, Melissa. Super beautiful.
Yeah. Where do you want to start with this story?
Oh my gosh. That's a good question. I always think that, so is a birth story. I was thinking about this a lot before I got on the call, because I was like, what do I actually want to share? And it's like, for me, the journey of the birth is so connected to the journey of the pregnancy. It's like the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. And
it's all part of the story.
And when we're in physiological birth, especially when navigating into these realms of like pleasurable birth, it's like the drama, when we have a successful physiological birth, there isn't a lot of drama in the birth. And so there's not a lot to the story. Sort of like, well, went through A, B, C, D. Yeah. Everything went smoothly. Baby came out. We were all happy. Like there's no like in it.
I guess it's a misnomer, hey, because I'm not like, so what happened when the baby came out? Like that's not really the story. I'm like, tell me the journey. Like that's the story, right?
And I always say, like, when I'm working with people, we really need to do the work in pregnancy rather than in birth, because in birth the intensity is just like, it's like, standing in front of a speaker at a concert versus like listening to something in your earphones. During pregnancy, it's in your earbuds, and then but in birth, it's like standing in front of the concert speaker. You're like, you have to pay attention now.
I think of that often when people will tell me, like, I'm a really good self-advocate, and I'll just like go to the hospital with the non-ideal care provider and I'll self-advocate in birth. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think sometimes they're not asking, they're telling, and it's not something you can say then. But I just, in my experience for the women I've supported and for myself, I'm like, you can't then, like, you got to do it before. Like you're saying, like the work is before.
Yeah. Well, and
if you go up there thinking I'll fix the problem when it arises there, probably not, because you're all occupied with another task.
And I mean, imagine like, I don't know what your audience's level with psychedelics is, but like imagine trying to advocate for yourself in the middle of like a really strong mushroom or like ayahuasca journey. Like,
right.
No, you need a good...
And like pull yourself out and be like, no, actually, I'm going to decline that one.
Yeah.
And then drop back in. Like, no.
I mean, people do it. And like, I always say that the people who choose to like orgasmic birth or like physiological birth in the hospital, I feel like they're actually in some ways like more, chutzpah than I do. I wouldn't even think about that. And that was actually that's a great place as to where this pregnancy and birth started, because I was listening to podcasts and I listened to one with Sister Morningstar, this elder birth midwife lady from the States. And
I love listening to her.
She said, pregnant women are like deer on the edge of a strip mall. And you have a choice in your pregnancy whether you're going to jump into the chaos of the strip mall and the parking lots and or whether you're going to jump back into the forest. And when I heard that, I was just like, oh, I know where I'm going. I'm definitely not a deer getting a manicure. That's for sure. Get me to the deepest, darkest woods that exist.
Take me to the woods.
Take me to the woods. Take me to the woods. And we had been living in a beautiful town where I had a great community, which we talked about in the birth story, but it just wasn't wild enough. We were sandwiched between the main street and the bike path, and there's always just people and traffic and things. And I was like, this is, I've got a fenced yard, yay, but like, this is not how I want to raise my kids. I want to raise them in the woods, barefoot, like running around naked. And I just can't. There's just too much foot traffic for us to be like the weird, creepy, naked family at the end of the bike path before the skate park. Like, just couldn't do it, right? For lots of reasons. And so I knew in that moment that like we needed to get back to the woods. And my husband and I had done van life for a number of years. So we were like, oh yeah, let's go do that. And it's like with a toddler. Well, let's see if there's a good community. So I went looking for different community spaces, and oh my gosh, that journey. So there's a number of factors here. I'm like, this is 2022 spring. I don't know I'm pregnant yet, but I'm already on this hunt, right? So it's like I didn't know I was pregnant. And this whole pregnancy, when I look back and think about it, the birth, everything is all about right relationship with healthy feminine and healthy masculine, and leaving behind the toxic masculine and the toxic feminine. Um, and we figured out that I was pregnant because I was getting so irate with how I was living and where I was living. And I had a little bit of nausea, but like only only in relation to being stressed out with my living situation, right? I would get stressed out with my living situation. I'd feel a little bit nauseous. I just figured it was stress because it was like really stressful. Didn't occur to me that I was pregnant particularly. And we mentioned a little bit before we got chatting, but this journey, because we're talking about orgasmic birth and the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. In that, just before the conception of this baby, I had really gotten to a place where I think a lot of new parents are at, which is time, bandwidth, energy. Like my sex life that had been great before baby was just like slumping, right? It was like we were doing pretty good. We were still connecting regularly, but it was just not just didn't have as much energy and enthusiasm. But because I teach this stuff, I say to people, I say to women all the time, I go, like, you will show up for sex you want to have. You will make every excuse in the world for sex you don't want to have, right? If you know that it's going to be a rockin' hot, fabulous, like toe curling session, and you know that's what you're heading into, you will clear your schedule. You will find a babysitter. You will stay up late. You will make time, myself included, right? And um, and I wasn't doing that. I wasn't doing that. My husband was tired. We were both tired, and instead of staying up late together, I was going like, I'll just let him sleep. Like, why would I wake him up for, that experience? And it's not that it was bad. It was like my husband and I generally have had a very upward trend. We continue to deepen. It continues to get better. He's a fabulous, human and a fabulous partner and a fabulous lover. But as life grows, as we grow and expand, we have a greater capacity. And that birth of my second baby, that early labor that had been so orgasmic had really opened me up. I came out of that labor squirtier and hornier and like more orgasmic than I had been before. Um, and I get a little like TMI thing. That's okay. Vulnerability hangover just on the fly. That's fine. Uh, so But we had hit this place. We had hit this place where I was like, we were just, the tiredness was getting to both of us. And so we weren't bringing our best. And so we were sort of like no longer on that upward trend, but on a bit of a downward trend. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm not going to show up. Like, I'm not going to wake him up to be like frustrated and disappointed with some good stuff in there too. Like, I'm just like, no. And I got to this place where I started having a really uncomfortable conversation, which was, and because I was thinking about what had gone wrong, not wrong, but like what had made me switch from having this beautiful, glorious early orgasmic birth to a not, like to a scary one. And I was like, oh, it's because there's actually all of these things in our intimacy, which had been unconscious to that point, that got revealed in that pregnancy that I hadn't looked at. So I go like, oh, I have to look at this. And even before I got pregnant, I was like, I have to look at this. My birthday was coming up at the beginning of September. And I was like, okay, what I want for my birthday is like 7 days of sex that doesn't involve penetration, that is like pleasure oriented, high intensity, pleasure oriented intimacy that doesn't involve penetration, just for 7 days. We can go back to it. Doesn't involve you coming, just for 7 days. Let's just give it a shot, And my husband, bless him, he got so triggered and so angry. We didn't even, I had asked this before. We didn't even know. But I had asked him before, but then this was like a birthday wish, right? So then he goes like, oh, I got to take this seriously. He goes like, as soon as I bring it up, he goes like, we're already in it, aren't we? I'm like, yes. It took me like 4 weeks to have the courage to have this conversation. But what I knew was that like I had to break myself open. I had to face this thing, which is like man pleasure oriented intimacy. My pleasure is secondary, right? Because we had gotten to a place where it was like, we couldn't go deeper. We couldn't ride all those waves orgasmically in the birth because we had never been that deep together, because birth is like so cosmically, transcendently deep. Like we just hadn't done that. But I wanted it, right? Obviously. um, so we went on this journey of only connecting. Well, we tried to do the thing, but we ended up just having less sex and only having sex when I was, or like intimacy when I was really into it. So basically, we moved into what a lot of people do postpartum, which is we're having cyclical ovulation based intimacy, as opposed to like, because it's fun and it's a regular part of our lifestyle. It's just like, oh, just when the hormones say we're going to do it, which is maybe once a month for a couple of days for some people. For me, postpartum, there's phases where I sort of go like, oh, my body tries to ovulate for like 2-3 days at a time, and then takes 4 days off, and then tries again, and that seems to be what's happening based on the patterning, which I thought was fascinating, because I just assumed the fertility would go back into a monthly cycle, but I didn't get a monthly cycle.
How far postpartum did you see that cycle start to
It was about 6 months,
come about?
5-6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, they call it 7 steps of ecologically breastfeeding. I had read that book, and they were like, yeah, you did breastfeed through the night and on demand and da da da, and like you should be good for the first 6 months. And I was like, yeah. And then I just kind of got cocky, and 8 months after my baby was delivered, I was having ovulation driven intimacy, and here comes along my second baby. But I didn't find out that I was pregnant until we were 3 months along, and I had been nauseous here and there with stress around living situations, and just getting like less and less resilient to be able to handle it. Um, and for the first time in my husband and I's relationship, we started fighting. And we had like never fought. We were like getting angry and hollering, and it's just like, whoa, like this is not how we operate. Um, but also, in retrospect, we didn't know how to disagree either. Again, that man pleasing thing, right? Like I have very strong programming, like don't piss off the old grumpy man. And that comes into play a lot in the later bits. Anyway, so we find out we're pregnant. We're living with my mother-in-law. And as soon as we find out we're pregnant, we're like, oh no, she can't be at the birth. We love her. She's beautiful, but like she can't be living with us by the time we give birth. So then all of a sudden we're 3 months into a pregnancy. We just found out. And I had this piece from Sister Morningstar. I'm like, definitely to the woods. Um, and so we're like now in this like moving process. We're now in this process of exiting. Um, from my mother-in-law is quite medically focused in terms of her health solutions, and we didn't see eye to eye on that, but we coexisted anyway, as people do. Um, but I was like, no, that can't be part of my spectrum of existence, and so like that close to me, right? Like that inner circle of our living space, super important. So bless my husband, we had some deep conversations. We got clear on what we needed. He asked her to exit the space. We worked through that process. And then we were in this place of figuring out, where do we want to live? And I was doing work. The Kasia Urbaniak, Unbound, is just a fabulous book. She was 18 years a dominatrix and a Taoist nun. And so has this really like fierce, poignant view on female sexual energy and how to uh, get things done, and how to trust yourself, and how to manipulate other people with that sexual energy to like have what you want in a way that is like not harmful but still really like direct. So I was doing that work, and she talks a lot about the bad girl and what would your bad girl do, right? We walk around in good girl's never too loud. She's always polite. She always has snacks ready, like whatever that is. She always shows up on time. And it's like, bad girl doesn't brush her hair and doesn't care if she's wearing sweatpants when she shows up to the whatever, because her kids are happy, or I don't know, whatever it is for you, right? But that sort of idea. So I was really leaning into this idea of bad girl. I don't think I would have ever had the courage to say like, we have to, um, exit mother-in-law from the situation if I hadn't been like diving into this bad girl thing. So I had made a short list of like places that were possibilities for moving to, and it didn't feel like it was moving forward. It was just sort of like in this stagnant thing, but like pregnancy's ticking along. So I go like, we just have to make a decision and do it. And we know it's not where we're at. So we just have to choose a place. And Dan goes, well, what would your bad girl do? And it was like, boom, so clear. Like I'm going to this place and that's what's happening. And so we got a hold of the guy whose place it was, is a 500-acre, forming eco village. And I put eco village in quotes. You can't see me, but we'll get there later. Um, Up way north in BC. And, we went out for a week. Everything seemed good. He was really great. The guy was really great with our kids. The place was like kind of nasty, but we'd lived in, like really rough woodsy places before. So we're like, yeah, that's okay. We'll figure it out and we'll make it work. And we were really, caught on the dream and the idea. And I think like a lot of people heading into their birth experiences, because we were looking at this, we're like, we're going to go give birth in this place. And I was like, yeah, it's totally wild enough. It's like right on the river with this like beautiful old cabin. I was like, yeah, like pioneer days, and it's like, oh, it's 2.5 hours one way to the near, or is it 2 hours one way to the nearest big town and like 3.5 the other way to the other place where like you might, if you had trouble, you might go give birth there. And I was like, I don't care. Like, I just trust the process. I know we're going to be fine. Like, how badass, and like give birth in a cabin like that. Like, yeah, let's do it. Like I didn't feel, there was no fear about that. About like the remoteness of it. I just felt excited and like I was like on path with that wild deer, like bounding through the forest. I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we went out there. We packed everything up and we moved out there, and that was like a whole ordeal in and of itself. That whole moving process, as moving is. But one of the things that taught me was, I thought we were just going to move from the space we were in to the new space, but we actually ended up moving in with my parents for a week and a half and unpacking there and repacking. So it's like 4 moves to get to this place. It's just like really, plus a couple weeks with my parents, which is always, weeks at a time can be intense with parents. They're super beautiful and supportive.
Yeah, it's always intense.
But it's always, they say if you think you're enlightened, like go spend a week with your in-laws or your...
Oh, there you are. You're 16 again.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. 16, my parents helped me buy a car. Thanks, guys. Right? Like that's literally where we were at. And so, but what I learned in that process is like there were so many things that were out of my control. Like nobody's letting me lift boxes because I'm pregnant. I can put stuff in them, but I can't move them around. Right? Like there's sort of this like this not geriatric pregnancy. I hate that term, but like there is this sense of like you're incapacitated because you're pregnant, and I'm like, be true. My ligaments feel crappy some days. Like my legs feel weird. Like I've got this like miscellaneous pain in my calves, and I just don't feel good about like yeah. So it's like, oh, my ligaments, like, yeah, totally. Like some days I'm just exhausted and feel like achy. And so, yeah, go ahead and carry the thing for me. But also other days like, no, I could do it. Right. Just being back and forth in that. But with one move that turned into sort of 4 moves to get us there, it was like really exacerbated. And what I had learned in my second pregnancy, postpartum specifically, was like, just let other people do it. It's okay. Right. I had major tearing. So it's like, just let other people help if they're willing to help. If you've got somebody there, just like let them do it. So I was really sinking into that. And there was so much uncertainty around the timeline and the landlord we were leaving. And so I just really like halfway, second trimester, we get this like beautiful surge of energy. And I was in it. I was like, we're going to use this energy. We're going to move. But I also really got clear at that point of just being as relaxed as I could be with what was happening. Right. And taking the pauses, like if I was doing something and then the toddler got too busy, like, and needed something, like we just go lie down for 20 minutes or an hour or an hour and a half or however long that nap with the baby was, and just let go of whatever it was with the packing and just be in it, right? Just be in the moment, what is needed. And in those in-between moments when there was time, like get the things that needed done. And that served me really well later on. So we get out to the land, and my husband and I are just like heads down. I'm like, I had told him, I was like, I'll live off grid, but like you need to get me hot water for this birth. I'll birth, like I'll go live off grid, but like I want hot water. I'm gonna have 2 babies. We're doing diapers. We're doing bum washes. We're doing like, I just need hot water so we can do dishes and da 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 da. So I spent a good chunk of time like researching which off grid hot water heater we were gonna get and all this stuff, and going to the hardware store. And at one of my hardware store trips, there's this woman that I see because I'm integrating into the community. I'm going to events, and I'd seen her at a dance thing, and I was like, who is this goddess, right? She's got this like glorious long white hair in this like black and red lacy thing that like is like very gloriously beautiful, but also like so sexy and like not risque, but also like, wow, like you're just like, who is this lady? Like, I just need to know her. So I had seen her before in this other context, and then all of a sudden there she is in the hardware store. So me being me, I go like, hey, like, let's have a chat. So I end up sitting nursing because, the toddler only goes so long before he goes like, hey, I'm bored. So I'm sitting on the hardware store, nursing my baby, chatting with this glorious goddess, and just having all of these beautiful connections. And we connected because she had had twins. And my husband was convinced this whole pregnancy that we had twins, that I was carrying twins. And I was like, I was never really like, yeah, I'm having twins, but I had had a couple of dreams about 2 babies, and I had really like all sensations on one side and like very little only occasionally on the other side. So I thought maybe it was like one really active twin and one really quiet twin. I think actually it was just like a placenta on one side and baby on the other side in retrospect. But my husband was like so convinced we were having twins, and it felt really rude to like deny the existence of a potential second baby. So I just was going along with it, being like, yeah, maybe it's twins. It's like, oh, maybe it's twins way back in the woods, way north. Like, we're in the forest. But this woman had had twins herself. She'd had IVF twins like 20 years prior, and so we connected around that. And the last thing she said to me before she left was, I'll doula your feet at your birth if you need it. And I go like, oh, I don't even really know what that means, but God, I really need that. Yeah, let's do that. So I grabbed her phone number and we connected. And I was like, I don't know what doula your feet at my birth means, but you are the person to do that. Like, I've been praying, with like for an elder woman who can just like support me and like anchor me in the feminine, because I got 2 boys and a husband and a boy dog, and it's a guy I'm living with, and I just really could use some ladies. And so we swapped numbers and we started connecting, and that was really beautiful. And we were out on the land, and it was maybe a month in before I had an issue come up, and I went to take it to the guy who we were renting from, who was this eco village founder, again in quotes, because he was living on the land by himself for 15 years, trying to start an eco village, continuing to not have people stay, which we found out later. But we had an issue come up with him, and I just got this like hard no, like this, like, no, right? I was like, hey, like, have feelings, I have thoughts, like, I have preferences, and no, right? And it made me mad. My pregnant self was like, oh, I hate this, I'm gonna smash you. Right? Like, oh, that's not how you talk to a landlord. That's not how you talk to a like new community mate. But I was also really in this like unbound work. So I was like learning to stand in my like energetic ground stronger. And I was learning how to, like work with my trigger and just like keep communicating. So we got into this issue, and it became very clear to me that this might not be the place for us to be long term. I took that to my husband, but my husband was in what, in retrospect, we now talk about as being fawn. He was in a misogynistic fawn. So the most people are familiar with like fight, flight, and freeze. But there's a fourth one, which is a human adaptive cultural thing that, isn't like inherently mammalian per se, but is like something that culture has taught us, and something that like humans have learned to adapt to patriarchy and highly, stressful experiences. So it's basically this thing that you'll see dogs do sometimes, where they just lie, not because they're happy, but they lie on their back being like, just it don't hurt me, right? It's like somewhere between freeze and flight, but it's got this
Mm-hmm.
paralysis, like whatever you do. And I see this is what happens, I think, in hospitals, and what ends up,
Mm-hmm.
people who want to have home births, but they end up like midwife transferred, or they end up listening to their partner and transferring. It's like they're in a they're in a fight flight or a scared space,
Yeah.
and the fear says the authority will tell me what to do, the authority will tell me what to do, right?
Yeah.
And
It's making yourself
yeah,
small and cute and non-threatening and abdicating your power for safety.
yeah, yeah. And this is what causes, husband pleasured, sorry, man-centered pleasuring, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
we don't know where our pleasure is, and if there's another way, and how we could actually possibly center ourselves, right? And this is
Yeah.
the same thing that I see, makes home birthers or free birthers go to the hospital 2 days after, because they still haven't worked their way all the way out of that programming,
It's being the good
being
girl.
the good girl. And sometimes there
Mm-hmm.
are legitimate issues that,
Mm-hmm.
cause us to want to
Of
go do
course.
those things. But a lot of the time, it's an unwillingness to be with the uncertainty, an unwillingness to be with our own intuition and our own power. And so, we, so my husband dropped into that. He went, "Oh, old guy. Old guys are in charge. Old guys think women can't do things. Old guys think women need to be babied but also belittled. Old guys think that women don't know what they need or they want. They're just pregnant, pregnant and emotional, and we should sort of ignore their emotions and their thoughts and their feelings." Um, and it took us about a month and a half of me like kind of going like, "Hey, no, hey, no, 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 no," right? Every day going back and forth between these two polarities, between, like uh, it was really interesting because, no, narcissists and sociopaths don't show their faces right away, but they show them in little ways. And so
Yeah.
we were living in this experience where it was like so kind, so loving, so tender with our 2-year-old, so firm, so no, so like not disrespectful, but like firmly like whatever you care about is not important to me, to my face. And
Mm-hmm.
so your wife is da na 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 na, and how do you let her treat you like that? And women are so fucking da
Ooh.
da da da, to my husband, right? So I didn't
Mm-hmm.
see any of that. I hear it from him later because we're talking, and it just got like crazier, and it got crazier and crazier. The whole thing was like nutty. Um,
Yeah.
but the thing that I learned was centering in myself, my authority, right? I called some friends. I go like, I feel like I want to call the abuse escape line. Like I haven't felt like this since I left my crazy ass ex. Like what is going on? And my wise shaman self goes, "Yes, we are clearing all nasty things out of your field. That's what birth and pregnancy are about. We're clearing resonances of your ex out of your field. We're
Mm.
clearing resonances of nasty patriarchy and misogyny out of your field.
It's an
It's an
opportunity.
opportunity. Just like center in yourself." And so I got to a place where like we were doing shared meals at the beginning, and it was nice, but I got to a place where I was like, no, I just need to take care of my nervous system. Like the only thing that's two things scared me in that pregnancy. One was the potential of hemorrhage because I was scared because of this guy or because of his dog, because he had a waist height, 6-month old, poorly trained Kangal dog. Yeah. And I had a toddler and was pregnant, and there were cows, and like it was just like there wasn't initially there wasn't a space where I was like, I can just be outside and be okay, and nothing's going to trample my kids, right? So that we're dealing with this, but there's like this creating this bubble of safety was like huge, and it started with me inside going, even if he's being crazy, I can just the property's big enough, I'll just go hang out by the river. I don't need to see him, I don't need to talk to him. So my husband fielded a lot of that drama crazy, and I just like, "No. No, 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 I don't participate in being treated like that. I don't participate in being talked to like that." Um, and what we started to do, what was really, really impactful was we actually built what we called a psychological fence. So I wanted an actual fence to keep the cows out of the, 15 feet in front of the cabin, so I could just let the kids play and not worry about whether like charging, trampling cows were like chasing each other and all that. We eventually built a physical fence, but what we did first was my husband grabbed a bunch of twigs and big sticks out of the forest, and he built this beautiful circular thing that just came off the front bubble of the front porch and was like, this is our space. And I started to create this space that was like, oh, this is my space. And I could work with the dog, the puppy, and train him because we had this tiny little fence that he could jump over. But it was a psychological fence that I created for myself that said, this is my center of authority. I am in the middle. Nobody can enter this. I didn't let the guy enter the space. I go like, you actually are not allowed on that side of this side of my psychological fence. You have to stay on the outside of my psychological fence. Right. Um, and so we continued to build that and we continued to work on that. And at some point later in the pregnancy, it actually became this psychological spiral. So I saw myself, and then I saw the front porch, or I saw the front door, and then the front porch, and then this fence that we built, and then the physical fence, the electric fence that was keeping the cows out. And it was just like, oh, this is my space. This is my psychological spiral that continues to give me good boundaries outside of me. It was so delectable because there was so much that was like not the way I would have wanted it to be, but I was just taking care of what I could control. Um, and the other thing that I felt really, really called to in this pregnancy was to center myself with a circle of prayer. So I thought about all the people that I had connected with over my whole lifetime who felt solid, grounded, loving, and clear in their, goodwill for me. And I started a Facebook chat. There were about, I think, 35 people total. And I just said, hey guys, I feel really clear that like when I start birthing process, I want you to know, I want you to hold sacred prayer for me. And I want to do that. And I actually ended up with 2 younger women and 2 elder women, and they all held a direction because they were physically in different places. They were like north, south, east, and west of me. Um, and I mailed them each a candle so that we could all light these like candles that had been together and separate. It was like so glorious. Um, and I got a lot of sense of connection to other people in that way, and a sense of being at the center. And this comes into play later because uh, there was a moment where that prayer fence and that psychological fence merged into an actual object that had, physical action in the world, you know, um, which we'll get to soon. But there was just this space of like really centering self in that. And those last couple of weeks, like the beautiful goddess who offered to doula my feet, she also offered we could birth at her land. She had um, this beautiful property, also looking over the river with this beautiful mountains. And every time I go there once a week on Tuesdays, we drive the hour and a half into town to get groceries for the week. And I would stop at her place and we would hang out, and every time I would go there, I would go like, oh, she's a very generous being. So she would gift me things and she'd give me food and we'd just hang out and she'd listen to my heart. And every time I went there, I would like, this is how we're supposed to treat pregnant ladies. Oh, where I'm living is like not quite the right place. This is like, that's not right. But then I would go back there and I'd spend the rest of the week caught in that psychological trap of narcissism that just makes you feel crazy. And you go like, oh, like I'm being gaslit. I'm not being listened to, like all of these things. And it's so funny because like I really thought I had put all of that stuff behind me, but then here I was right smack in the middle of it, saying yes to it, right? I could have pulled the plug and gone like, oh, let's find a different place to be. But I asked my husband first. I fawned and said, authority figure husband, can we move, please? And he goes, no, we just did that 4 times to get here. Like, no, not again, right? And I go, oh, fair enough, right? Like, uh, so moving to like control the things that I could control, I just ended up spending that last month, like the cabin was right next to the river. So we just go down to this really steep river bed, like sandy area that went down to the river. It was super steep, but we just like carved little flat chunks out of it so the toddler had safe places to play. And I just really cherished that. I was like, oh, this is the last time my life is going to be this simple. I got my like teenager and my toddler, and we're just in it. We're in nature. We're playing with the mud. We're playing with the water. We're in with the sun on my skin, and it was super beautiful. And just sort of like let anything else that was like less than that, just breathe it away as much as I could. We finally got the bath set up. That was glorious. And so then I moved into daily baths. The bathtub was like right next to the cabin in a gazebo, and we would hop in and out of that bath like 3 to 7 times a day. Right? What do you want to do next, buddy? In the bath. Yeah. Right. And I not so much when the kids were around, but when I was by myself in the bath in the evenings, right? And those sort of like as labor's going like, not this evening, but let's like help you feel it. Like we're getting ready. Like I would go into the bath and I would take the hot water hose that filled up the bath and just put it on my yoni and be like, feels good there. Oh, suddenly all my aches are gone. Oh, suddenly I feel so good and relaxed. It's like I'm pregnant, but like all my pregnancy is gone. It's like so nice. Just like being there and like making a practice of that. Cause I had really thought like, what did I do? What did I need to do that would set me up differently? And it was like, with my second birth, I was like, oh, I need to have good sex with my husband every day. And with my third pregnancy, I was like, I need to center my pleasure and be out of people pleasing as much as possible and connect with him if I want to and ask for what I need and want. Absolutely. But that might be foot massage, not legs wide open, right? It might be like just like, oh, my whatever is achy, or I could really, please offer me this offering of whatever it was I was asking for. So I did some journaling near the end, and there was this sense of like, how do I know like the different stages of birth, right? Because I know the stages of birth, and I go, how am I actually going to know when to call this lady? Because with my second birth, I had a lady on call, but she was 20 minutes, maybe 5 minutes away if she drove really fast. And I didn't really think I was going to call her. But in this birth, I was really craving ladies around me. And the guy was being kind of crazy. So it felt like protective to have another woman around. My husband was being kind of like challenging as well. So it felt protective to have a woman around. But she was an hour and a half away. How am I going to figure out when in labor I'm going to call her? Right. And I had asked her questions about her birth story and whatnot. And she was in labor in hospital for 6 days with twins and delivered them vaginally 20 years ago. So like early aughts, right? Like 2000 something or late 90s, right? So I knew that her birth story involved being in a long, prolonged labor. And we chatted about it. And I was like, I do not want her to show up early because she's going to add to my birth field long, prolonged labor. I want to call her right when I need her near the end. So I was doing some journaling and trying to figure out like I asked myself the question, like, how will I know birth is imminent? And I asked my husband this too. And he's like, well, we're imminent right now. And I'm like, no, imminent is like right now, like we're crowning, like that imminence. It was like, oh, Michelle's there. That's how I'll know we're imminent. And how will I know we're close to birth? It's like, oh, well, it'll be evening and everybody will be sleeping and I'll be in this labor experience by myself and I'll just be in it and it'll just be me all by myself for most of it. I was like, wow, really? Like, that's so fascinating. Like my husband was such a big part of that second birth. Like how I'm going to labor by myself. And I'm like, well, if it's daytime, like he's going to be with the toddler. Like I just have to be really prepared for that. And I don't know how long it'll be for the lady to come. So just really have to be prepared for that. So I spent maybe a week, like just sort of going back and forth with my intuition and this piece of writing and going like, how will I know this? How do I know when to call her? And then I started trying to arrange it. And then we got into this huge kerfuffle with the guy, the landlord guy. And I was like, all of a sudden, I'm like a little kid trying to make sure mommy and daddy are happy with each other, right? I'm trying to like peacemake between these two, this 70-year-old and this 59-year-old, neither of whom are my parents, right? And I'm in the middle trying to like peacemake. And then I just got to this place where I was like, F it. Like, she's a strong, bold woman. Like, she can handle him. you text him. I'm not going to text in the middle. You guys huff it out, right? So then they have some exchanges, and she goes like, "Oh, he's hard to deal with." I'm like, "Yeah, no shit." Like, she's like, "Are you sure you don't want to birth here?" And I was like, "I really, really strongly feel like we went and walked her property, and she's like, oh, you could set up here." And I was like, "No, like it's going to happen out there. I just know it." Even though that sucks, but but that's just how it's going to go. And I think people sometimes have that inevitability about their hospital births or their midwife births, right? Where it's like, you just know it's going to go one way. And maybe if I had looked at why I thought it was so inevitable that way and shift, I could have maybe made changes and done inner work to shift that in that moment. But it felt so certain that I was like, and we had spent the last 3 months setting everything up. So the birth itself, it was a couple weeks of just being on the beach and hanging out. And then this experience of in the evening starting to ride these waves and starting to ride them, and they'd be bigger and bigger. And all of it just intensity, right? I've been having surges, Braxton Hicks, since 30 weeks or so, right? Really early. And I remember the night that he was born. It's for a couple days before, I had been oh, maybe it's tonight. Oh, maybe it's tonight. And I go the mistake you made last time was thinking it was tonight and staying up too late. Go back to sleep. Right? It might be tonight, but you still got a toddler tomorrow. Go back to sleep. Right?
Yeah.
So I was doing a lot of that. I'd get up if I needed to, and we're still minding it was a wood stove cabin, right? So I'm feeding the fire in the middle of the night as I'm doing things. So I'm oh well, I guess I'm up anyway. I just add some wood to the fire, no big deal. And I loved it. I remember the first time I sat in front of that wood fire and going this is how I'm going to keep my family warm. And I was oh, this is right relationship with fire. I did the right thing going into the deep woods. Yeah, I did the right thing. Deep. Love it. Just feed the fire. So happy about it. And still managing the toddler and in the night. And yeah, so then the night of, it's the sensations are a bit stronger. And it's so interesting because I do believe that with physiological birth, the intensity is so intense. Even if it's pleasure, it's so beyond our normal scope of the consciousness that we're in. It's like being in a deep meditation or an epic intimacy experience. It's hard to remember because the consciousness we're in is actually just so different. And when people have detailed stories about things that happened in their birth, I go oh, you weren't in that, you weren't in the trance space. You were still thinking and managing and trying to figure things out. My interpretation, everybody has their own interpretation of their birth story. But so I don't have so many memories from the actual birth itself. I remember being up late in the evening. I remember being in the tub and going oh, the water's coming over the edges, just into the grass or whatever, but I got to turn this thing off. Right. So there's I'm losing that sense of being in control and things being easy. I have to time my actions between these surges. Right. But I'm in the tub and I've got the water where I want it. And I'm feeling really good. And I'm riding those early surges and just being wow, this is really big and really whoa. It's this huge opening. And I had been listening. One of my rocks and anchors in the pregnancy and my preparation was this birth track that I had built for myself. And it's just all these layers. I have it on my website if people want to listen to it. It's all these layers of different stories from women sharing their orgasmic birth stories. So it goes oh, you're going to do it and you might as well do it orgasmically. It is that easy. You just focus and decide what you want and then you go there and you make it happen, right? Stretch, stretch, stretch. It's just in this transcendent space, right? And it just goes on and on and on for 15, 20 minutes. And then it sort of moves into these just sound sonics, right? Theta brainwave entrainment stuff. So, because I was I was well, I'll build a 3-hour track. If I have a 3-hour labor, that'd be great. And And the first little bit, I'm getting into it. And so I just been listening to this like every day on repeat. I spent some time with it every day. So I'm listening to this again in the bath and I'm going like, yeah, right. Lean into the pleasure. I tried to lean away and get away from birth with my second, and that was not the right thing. So I just got to lean in. And then I got to this place where I think a lot of people I think have really beautiful early labors. And then there's this moment where you go like, oh shit, this is bigger than me. And I can't get away from it. And it's just going to keep happening. And now what do I do? And this is why when I teach about birth, I go like, you need to have a ritual. You need to start that ritual early in your labor. And it needs to be something that's strong enough that will see you through. And with my second birth, it was like, it wasn't going to be my husband, because I'd heard all these stories about people like squishing the hips and doing the thing, and the husbands in these like endurance stamina things. And I was like, oh God, I don't want to do that to anybody. Like, I got to find the answer inside of myself. Right. So this was like, I was like, pleasure's it. I'm going to move towards it. I remember being in it enough that I was like, I got to get out of this tub. Like, I can't pay attention to like not drowning anymore. Right. I gotta hop out. I've got like, I don't know, just a little bit of time. I've got just enough time to get inside. I gotta turn the water off and get inside. Okay. And if I don't make it all the way, I can just do one on the edge of the porch. That's fine. Right. Like, it's not a big deal. So just really kind of like, I'm like just enough thinking to go like, there is something that I'm navigating here, but I'm mostly in it. So I do those things. I turn the water off and I come inside, and it's cold AF compared to the bathtub, right? I got the heat cranked on the bathtub. It's so cold. And I go like, oh, I'm inside. It's cold. And you're like, okay, whoa, here comes another one, right? It's just these waves coming through me. And I go, I have to start the fire next. I got to start the fire between this one and the next one. Okay, how do we do this? And it's kind of cramped and kind of small. So I go like, okay, and if it really comes on and I'm sort of flailing, like, how do I make sure I'm safe and I'm not burning myself on the fire? Kind of thinking about that. So I get everything ready and I'm just sort of sitting in front of the wood stove, and I do one surge, and then and it finishes. And as soon as it finishes, I grab the lighter and I grab the wood and I go like, best fire making skills, right? Let it go. Okay. Oh, I think I got it started. Oh, right. Here comes another one. And I'm just like, I'm in it. And then I go, okay, it's going to be warm. We're good. Don't worry about that. And I got onto the floor in this space. We had this like giant it's like 2 double beds where everybody sleeps. And we just have this like giant family bed. So everybody else is sleeping in there. And I'm on the floor. I had gotten these like cushy foam things because I'd knelt on that wood floor, and I was like, dang, this thing's hard. I need something soft to kneel on because I'm going to end up kneeling on this floor. So I'm like, my squishy floor. I'm so happy about this. And I got into this place where it's like, oh, now it's starting to get overwhelming. Now I go like, oh, this is where I don't want to be here. This is where I'm going to run away. And what I did differently was I leaned in, and I leaned into pleasure. And I thought, orgasmic birth, I kind of go like, oh, I'm so sensual in my body. It feels so good. This was like, no, I'm on the edge of feeling overwhelmed. And I call it like a white-knuckled orgasmic birth, right? Like, you're just like, holding on, right? I had a lot of that energy. And I literally just like, go like, what sensation can I put into my body that will net me feeling okay? So I'm like, let's just try this on this next surge. Let's just like touch myself in a way that feels good and pleasurable. Let's just give that a shot. So I've got this sort of like gentle, like the surge is starting, and I've got this sort of like gentle, like touching of myself. And I go like, that's not going to do it. So it turns from this gentle thing to this like, right? Like this really like white knuckled sort of like manic, like just like rubbing my pussy, being like, okay, we're going to get this through. It's like, actually, as soon as I matched the intensity of what I was experiencing with the intensity of my own action, and just like sheer just like nervous system overwhelm, and the way that the body is wired, it's like I actually think the clit might be there just for birth. It's like our secret like hack. And if anybody goes like, what, that's crazy, go like, have you ever been in an intimacy experience where you're like, this is so, or maybe even this is kind of awful, but if you touch yourself, like you go like, oh, I can handle this. This is, I can do this. It's okay. Right? Like, It's basically where I was at. And hours passed in this place, right? The surge would come and I'd go like, wah! And ride that wave and try and relax as much as I could into it, but just like stick with that ritual. And I remember at some point going like, what if this is really ridiculous? What if I just don't do this? And then another surge came and I was like, ah! I got scared and I was freaked out and I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't like this. And I was like, oh, that was a bad idea. Let's go back to what we were doing. That was working, you know? So then I'm doing that. And I remember feeling like really pukey and like shaky and being like, oh, what's happening? Am I okay? And I'm like, oh, I must be in transition. This is transition symptoms. Great. Okay, where's my dang tinctures? I forgot to take transition tincture last time. I'm going to do it this time, right? So I remember taking like a dropper full of transition tincture. And then later, I checked the bottle and like half the bottle's gone. Like I remember taking it once. But I kept taking it, right? Like it became part of the ritual. I just kept doing it.
It was once every time.
Just once every time until at some point I was like, oh, no, I don't need this anymore. And then I remember I'm like lying on my back with my foot against this like shelf thing that my husband had made, still just like riding the waves. And I remember looking up and my son, so we have timestamps from him. He says he woke up and was like, what are they making love downstairs? What's happening? It is loud. Like usually this is loud. And then she's like, oh, maybe it's the baby, right? So he had heard me. I'd been going all night doing this, right? But he heard me about 5 minutes before the baby came. He comes down the stairs and there's just a tiny window in the door. So I'm inside the door in the cabin and he's outside coming from upstairs because there's 2 different spaces. And he looks through the window and I look at him and I just see a kid of mine who needs something from me. And I go like, no. And he looks hurt and he turns around and I go like, no time right now to babysit the teenager. He got himself, right? Like, oh! Yeah. Back in the next one. And then a couple surges later and the door opens. And here's my beautiful birth goddess, right? I had told my husband to call her earlier before when I was still in the bath. We had this moment. I was like, oh, is it morning? Oh, you're getting wood to make the fire happen. Oh, okay, it's morning, right? Oh, and in the bath at some point, God, I nursed the toddler. That was like the most terrible thing to nurse the toddler instead of paying attention to the surges. At some point, I did it for a bit and I was like, I can't do this. Like, you just have to take him. I don't even care what happens. Like, I just can't do this. It made them so intense. And then you could like, oh, oxytocin, nipple stimulation just like amplified the whole thing. But like nursing the toddler and rubbing my pussy, like that's just too weird. So we just got to move the toddler out, right? Like, so we're like, right, birth is imminent. And I have birth is imminent. I know birth is imminent because there's the goddess. There's the goddess. She's coming through the door. And I tore really bad with my second, so I had been sort of worried about it, but I knew I could heal from it. That was the gift of tearing. I knew I could heal from tearing. So I wasn't scared about it. I was like, if I tear, like that sucks, but like also like I'll get through it. It won't be the end of the world. So I wasn't so scared about that. So the goddess comes through the door and I've already been in this process where I've felt, and I feel the baby is like almost crowning. I like reach down, because I've been reaching down the whole time. And I'm holding his head and I go like, I am not ready. Get back in there. And I just literally like put my hand on the top of his head and pushed him back up. I was like, not quite yet. Hold on. Right? And you push him back and he's still twins at this point in my brain, right? I'm like, this is still twins. Right. Which was such a huge part of the pregnancy, like the trust of just being like, I might have twins and that might be okay. And we might be in the middle of nowhere and while we do this, and like, just like leaning into the trust all the way through. So the goddess is there and I feel, I see her. And for the first time, I feel kind of scared. I go like, oh, I am scared. Indeed, I am. You're right. I am. I didn't realize I was scared. I was just riding these waves so orgasmically and in this, but like actually parts of me are scared, which in retrospect, I go like, was that her fear or my fear? Interesting. Not quite sure. Like something to unpack.
Or maybe they're like pulling you out of it a little bit. Like you're noticing your external environment now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally. Because I hadn't been before that at all. All of a sudden but also that's like that, you know, that emergence is a time where the adrenaline kicks in and we notice our
Yes.
external environment more. So all of a sudden, my
Right.
external environment has lots of information in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she comes up really close, and I go like, "Don't touch." She holds my hand, and I go like, "Don't touch my body." And should we still laugh about it? Because and she goes like, "I walked through the door, and you were like, no, you're pussy." And she's like, "Oh, is that a head? Oh my god!" Right? Like I got here just in time, right? So she holds my hand. We lock eyes. We have this like beautiful moment of just like, oh, she's got me. I'm like, oh, I can relax. I'm okay. I'm held, right? Like, and then again, and like just still touching myself, holding her hand, like in these surges. And then the babe, I see my husband behind her. My son is behind her. So everybody's looking through the door, and she's right there with me. And I go, oh, right, like, and I feel the baby, and I go like, okay, and then the baby comes halfway out. He's up to his waist, just like hanging out of my body. I go like, oh, that's so different from my previous. Both of the other two just like shot out like cannonballs. This one's just like hanging there, and I go like, don't touch the baby. Right? I'm still defending my space a little bit. Right? I still don't have that full trust where I go like, oh, she knows. She's very hands-on, very like cuddly. So it's like, I like that, but don't touch my baby. So we just sit there, and there's this like beautiful quietude of just like, oh, you're like, oh, probably that's the hardest part, but maybe I have another baby in there. Right? So then I push the baby, and then the next one comes, the baby goes right out. And my husband goes, oh, it's a boy, right? We thought we'd pregnant with twin girls, it's a boy. I go like, oh, that's great. I grab the baby, I'm holding the baby, but I'm also like palpating my belly to be like, do I have a second dang baby in there? Am I doing this again, or am I almost done, right? Like, I go like, okay, there's the thing at the bottom, definitely, but like, it doesn't feel hard enough to be a baby. I think we might really be done. And I'd asked, it was a beautiful Canadian elder midwife. I was like, if I have twins, does it go baby placenta, or does it go baby placenta? She goes, baby placenta. I was like, great. So if the placenta comes out, like I'm in the clear. She's like, most of the time. I'm like, okay, but like if the placenta comes out, like I'm in the clear, there's no other baby, right? And you'd be able to tell also, obviously, by then too. But we just move into like this like ogling the baby and being so like in love, and I don't even remember the placenta coming out. Like it just happened, right? It wasn't something that I worked at or anything like that. And then we move into the postpartum bed immediately, right? And the toddler really wants to nurse, and oh my gosh, nursing a toddler and a brand new baby is like, oh, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, even though it's like so sweet, but it's also like 3-year-olds, great, let them nurse with the baby. But he was just like, he was irate that there was somebody else in the space, even though there's 2 boobs, and he had gotten a snotty nose that morning. So he's like snotty, like just like, wah. But I wasn't worried about establishing supply because we were already nursing, and the toddler was like taking care of that. So that was nice in a way. And we just spent that day, like she stayed and made sure that things got cleaned up. And, but it was really like not a messy birth at all. Like Waters, I don't even remember when the Waters burst. I don't even know, maybe in the bathtub at some point. But like, there was none of that. It was like wipe my legs and wipe the floor a little bit. And I think I finished the cleanup with the stuff that had sort of like gone underneath my like foam mats and stuff had gotten underneath. So I like cleaned that up. But like 2 days later, I did that myself, right? Yeah. So we just hung out, and I was like in bossy pants, like birth queen. I was like, make my infusions, bring me my drinks. Where's my snacks? Dang, I'm hungry. Like, where's my baby? Take the toddler. I need to, right? Just like telling everybody what to do, and just like really being in it and just feeling so good. And we had gotten news the day before we gave birth. We went and visited the people who took us in for the month afterwards, because we actually, the guy we were staying with was like so crazy that he's so crazy that he chased the goddess down the hill. He was like, you can't be on the land. You can't bring your dog. You are not allowed to be here. She's fighting him all the way because he's nuts, because he's territorial, right. Like nobody else on the land. Like, I want a community, but nobody else can be here. Nobody else is good enough. They're all crazy. Women are nuts. Like he just had this really like out for women. And so they're coming down the hill, and like he's chasing her. And that was why my husband didn't show up at the door when my teenager was there, because he was walking to go meet her to be like, you shall not pass, right? I didn't find out any of this until like days later when we were all
Oh,
debriefing
yeah.
the birth story. For me, I had this like beautiful, like orgasmic, safe in the thing. I had created this psychological fence. But for my husband, he was still really dealing with that relationship
Yeah.
with the patriarchy, the internalized patriarchy, and the, the holographic reality. And so he was walking towards the electric fence to like make sure that my birth support woman was going to make it well. She got a wheelbarrow full of like all her gear and her dog trailing her and da da da, and his dog yapping at her the whole way too, right? Like just so nutty. But they got to this place at the electric fence, the external space of my psychological fence, and I had felt in that labor when I got really into it. I was like, "You have to let the ladies know now's the time. Prayers up, right?" Like just like, and I had invoked this like circle of protection around me. And what happened when he got to that electric fence? My husband didn't say anything to him. He let my birth goddess through the fence. He closed the fence in front of the guy's face, and he turned around and he walked away. And then when he got, close to where we were, he turned around and he looked and he's like, my husband works with like things that you don't normally see. And he says that when he looked back, there were several beings, like non-physical beings, that were literally just standing there with this guy. And like they had turned his consciousness off, like he was a robot just standing there.
Wow.
Without his like volition and free will active in the space. And he just stood there for like 10 minutes, just like frozen in like weird robot zone, and then like turned around and went back up the hill. And when I heard that later, I was like, "Oh, witches, prayers up," right? Like it's just this like such a strong medicine of that fence and being like, "This is my birth," because I had spent so much time being like, "This is my space. I don't care if I'm on your land. This is my birth space. I will not let anything dangerous come into this space. I will not, and I will enact my husband to be my protector, and I will enact my birth goddess and my, baby and all of this. Just like hold it." And I remember hearing that story and just being like, "Oh, it worked. I did it. It's good." And the next day, like we just spent that first day just like ogling the baby and bleeding a little bit, but not actually a lot, because I drank so much hedge nettle infusion, and it's actually anti-hemorrhagic, which I had no idea. I'd gotten stinging nettle and hedge nettle mixed up because I early in some of my herbalism things with different plants. And but it just like made the bleeding so little, and that was exactly what I needed, because we moved on 4 days postpartum. We packed everything into the trailer, and I used that lesson that I had of just letting people take care of things that weren't my business. I was like, my business is keeping my body from hemorrhaging. My business is keeping my babies nursed, both of them, keeping myself from sobbing, because it's kind of a really intense journey. And I do remember at some point having like both of them like screaming and trying to climb on my chest, and just being like, "This is so overwhelming," and just like crying. And then their crying goes like up 2 octaves, and I'm like, me crying this out right now is not the solution. We're going to transmute it as much as we can. We're going to move into fawn and surrender, but in a healthy way, right? Your will, right? I am here. It's like that. I don't know. There's got to be a beautiful word for it. Like we need to make a word for what mothers do when they like let go of their own volition and just serve their children. Like, I don't know what that word is, but there needs to be one.
Yeah, we do need one.
So we just moved into that, and I was in that, and I had the day before we gave birth, I had arranged where we were going to go, and they were like, "We've got an empty space, a whole basement suite, sauna, 2 saunas, and a hot tub." And I was like, "Dang, life loves me," right? Like, and these beautiful like Spanish Canadian couple or Mexican Canadian couple, with just most beautiful hospitality vibes. Just going like, "Yeah, you guys can just stay in our basement and give us minimal money or whatever if you want, and just give us what you want, and you can stay there for 6 weeks." I was like, 6 weeks is long enough to figure out what we're doing next, and it's long enough to get through that scary postpartum piece where you just really want to be like rested and not doing too much. And so I just like I had orchestrated all of that with people, and again just asking community and reaching out and saying like, and it was this journey of like hey, anybody have a trailer who can like come help us move all our things? So my husband doesn't have to drive 2.5 hours that way to go pick up a trailer to drop off to pick up all the things and da da da. And hey, new person I've met, like, can you help put the things into the trailer? And anyway, we moved to the new place. We spent that first month, figuring out house logistics of where we were moving next. But in between, just in this like beautiful bliss birth bubble, being like, wow, we just left hell. Now we're in like the new earth with these enlightened, beautiful hosts. What glory, right? Like really just like felt reborn into heaven and reborn into like all of my needs being met and the perfect little place lined up in 2 weeks and just like welcomed into the coolest little corner of the neighborhood in the valley that we were in. People go, oh, we'd love to move there. Just feeling really, 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 really cared for and supported and just so relaxed and anchored. And again, orgasmic birth, so horny. 2 babies. How do we manage all that, right? Like so tuned on in those aftershocks, like being like some of them did feel like painful. And I had this, I was like, but my whole birth wasn't painful. Like, why are the aftershocks painful? Shouldn't I be riding waves of orgasmic energy in the aftershocks? Wow, what a concept. And I was like, but that's not what I'm doing. But then I had this opportunity to practice some because I had Birth Goddess there. And I was like, what if I open my eyes and look at her and lean into oxytocin as this is happening? Gosh, that's a like mind boggle for me because I've had such a distant relationship from like closeness with women. But I tried it out. Oh, indeed. If I focus on being in love and being connected and feeling so supported, those the after pains that people say get stronger with every birth. What if they're not meant to be painful? What if they're meant to be pleasurable? We get stronger with every. Oh my God, the love and like we're still just seething with oxytocin. Like, why pain? And I was like, well, why pain now? And I'm like, well, because there were things I didn't feel. I was white knuckled orgasmic birthing, right? I wasn't G-spot or vaginal orgasmic birthing. If people are familiar with like different types of orgasm, right? Like clitoral orgasm is very sharp. It's this like, right? It's got this sort of like tenseness to it. I wasn't G-spot. Oh my God, there's a baby like surging up and down on my G-spot orgasmic birthing, right? Next baby. I'll let you know how it goes, right?
Yeah, can't wait.
Give me another 1.5 years at least. Keep them a little bit further apart. But
yeah.
But just this like so much insight around like and this fervent belief. Like it is interesting because again there was so much drama around the experience around the birth. The birth was so simple in a lot of ways, right? It's like center pleasure, move forward, but the stuff around it made me go like, oh, I got so far away from the patriarchal medical system's hands. I was hours and hours away, but I still had internalized patriarchy, misogyny in my brain that caused me to manifest this totally the woods, except for this one crazy dude, right? And the impact that had on me and my husband. I was like, oh, so close. Next birth, right? Next life. And just seeing that so clearly and seeing all of those patterns and seeing myself like strong, unbound in that bad girl being like, that's right, I will just like pack up and leave and not even say bye. You don't get to see my baby. You don't get to like be introduced to this creature that I brought in. No, I don't want you as part of my postpartum bubble at all, right? We got curtains on the front porch. He's down in the garden. I'm like, no, I'm staying in the house. Like, get out of here, right? But like gloriously happy to like be off the front porch and like peeing in the grass, squatting the day after too, right? Being like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't tear because dang, that would be intense to like move 4 days postpartum with tearing.
Oh, yeah.
But people do that. That's what hospital birth is for a lot of people. They go home 4 days postpartum with episiotomies and stitching and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, like it seems crazy to move 4 days postpartum, but that's what we do. That's what people do when they birth in the hospital and then they go home. They're not moving their whole lives, but they're interrupting that birth bubble, right? And having had continuity and having had not, it's like, oh, continuity of space is so restorative and healing and
It's so good.
gentle. It's like so good. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any other gems that want to come out. I don't know. Just the connection. I think connection with my husband, right? And also just like people talk about it with free birth, right? Just this like sense of power. But coming out of orgasmic free birth, yeah? And going like, I set my sights higher. I knew I could free birth. I wasn't worried about that. I just set my sights higher and went like, let's see how far down that rabbit hole I can go in terms of my own vision of what I understand birth to be. And it has made the journey of like after my second birth, still really in that like man pleasing thing we talked about. But after this third birth, no way, not happening. Every once in a while, I'll drop into a little bit of it, and then I'll go like, "Whoa, that was ugly. Don't do that. Not ugly, right? Like we love pleasing them. There's a beauty in pleasing them. It's fun, and it can be really good in the body, but not without the exclusion of like, well, what about what I want in this moment, right? And so, just really like coming through that experience, so empowered in myself, so empowered in my body, connected to this idea like, oh, prayer is a real thing that has real life impacts in experiences, and trusting people more, right? So many people we had just met like 2-3 months ago showed up for us in incredible ways. They didn't necessarily show up later afterwards, but they, the birth bubble again. And I talked about this a lot on the podcast with Gemma about like how potent pregnancy and birth are on human psyches and how people will show up for those moments, but not for other things, postpartum or whatever, necessarily. I mean, just ask. Yeah.
Yeah, the need is great at that time. Yes. Maybe that's why we can call it in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a super vulnerable time of life. Yeah. Super, super vulnerable. And we're meant to do it with like 16 to 45 other humans around us being like, here's food, here's shelter. Don't worry, we got all the jaguars under control. Like,
yeah. Let me love on your toddlers.
Let me love on and nurse your toddlers for you, right? Like, no worries. Yeah. Grandma's got lunch. All the grandmas got lunch, not just one grandma, all of them, right? Like, but we're not, most people are not that integrated into tribe. And so we're just dealing with, psychopathic misogynists in our birth spaces, whether we like it or not.
There's lots of those.
But I also came through that experience being like, oh, I can walk my talk now, right? Like I can move forward. The last piece was, now I talk really clearly about it being an orgasmic birth. Because there was so much drama around it, I didn't want to claim that. And it wasn't until I actually read Portal, Yolanda Norris Clark from Freebirth Society. I read her book Portal after I gave birth that time. And I already had from Deborah Pascali-Bonaro, Orgasmic Birth Queen, that any birth that has any amount of pleasure in it qualifies as an orgasmic birth. Let it be, claim it, like, be in it. And I had wanted, I had some pleasure in my second birth. Okay, like feeling like grounded in pleasure in my third birth. But it was still, I didn't feel the claiming of it. And it wasn't until I read Yolanda's book and I came through that book and I went like, I really did have 2 orgasmic births, didn't I? It was a huge part of the experience. I was sexually empowered afterwards. I felt turned on, happy, and horny afterwards, as opposed to repressed, raped, and like miserable afterwards, right? Because I had that experience with my first. We talked about that last time, right? Like that impact that the cervical checks and the lack of control and all of that has on the sex life afterwards. I was like, I did. And I was like, okay, right? Busy with toddlers, busy with babies. But then my husband and I were talking about fertility because we're at that 6-month plus mark. We're talking about that. And I go like, I'm not ready to make another baby. He goes like, yeah, no, me neither. Not at all. We got to space them out more. This is nutty. I go like, yeah, you're telling me. You're sleeping through the night, right? But he said something. He's like, "Oh, birth is so intense, and like I don't know, and I don't know if I'm ready for another birth." And I was like, "No,
You?
Yeah, I was like, you? He's expressed his gratitude that I ride the waves of birth, and
Yeah.
my fingers crossed we'll ride our next birth like tantrically, and like he'll get to feel the gloriousness of the orgasmic
Oh,
waves
yeah.
of birth with our next one. We're working on the work to get there right now, because it's like
Cool.
layers of intimacy and relating, right? And we all start where we start,
Mm-hmm.
and my start was not so great, and his start was not so great in terms of like healthy intimacy, because most people's aren't, because we live
Mm-hmm.
in this like crazy culture.
Yeah.
Anyway, he said something about birth being intense and scary, and I was like, hold up, no, it was like this thing that like arose within me because of the experience I had with that third birth, where I was like, birth can be scary and terrifying and overwhelming, but it can also be pleasurable and glorious and so much sensation you have no idea how to even think about riding, how much pleasure there is available for you. And he
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, wow, okay. And I was like, oh, I really did have an orgasmic birth, didn't I?
Yeah.
Huh. And I was like, okay, my baby's 8 months old. It's time for me to get up on that pulpit and start preaching, Like, I was like,
Yeah.
like, you don't just go through something like that to like, you're like, did it. Yep, that was good. Just,
Yeah.
just keep mom. And I
You got
mean,
to preach that thing.
yeah, I mean, but, and that is like a lot of my life is just like being in mom zone. But at some
Yeah.
point it was like, oh no, like I feel so like I love being a mom, and it's like so beautiful. But also I know that like you don't end up being like Elena Harder Rekshan and like the queen of Joygasm, and like having created and written like in the podcast and all of these things that I like put together. Like I go like, I'm here for something more than just momming and homeschooling. Like just like you started the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, right? And we were like, and I feel so
Yeah.
alive and jazzed up and like here when I'm like teaching it, when I'm working with people, when I'm like talking on podcasts and stuff like that. And it's made me a better mom too, right? Now that I'm like
Yeah.
actively working on this, I'm like, oh, got like my hour of me time in the morning, probably chatting about
Yeah.
birth stories or like helping somebody out with their experience. And okay, then I can go spend the next 18 hours like helping everybody else's needs. But I got that like little,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's just
Yeah.
super
Totally
good.
relate.
Super good. Yeah, and
It is.
I think it's so important because there's so few. There are stories. There are so few stories, but there are also so many stories. But
Mm-hmm.
there's so many other stories, right? You're
Yeah.
like, oh, like 1,500 ladies like reported having orgasmic births in this one survey. That's a lot of ladies. And you're like, and the millions other like succumbing to the Western medical like authority regime thing, right? So it's like, nah, we got to
Mm-hmm.
get out here and we got to tell people like aim higher. It'll make you do your work even deeper. You'll come out of it
Yeah.
more strong with your partner. You'll come out of it more empowered. Even if you don't have an orgasmic birth, like it'll get you on the trajectory in the right direction of like fully letting go of all of that, all of those boundnesses, right? Being totally unbound and totally like in our like authentic personal self.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that that's so important, because it's easy to go like, oh, that's a lot of work and that's like tricky, but like we're raising girls. We want those girls to be like potent, powerful women who don't take no, a firm, mean no as an answer, right? We want to raise
Yeah.
boys who are kind and respectful and loving, and who go like, oh, my mom is a wise woman. I listen to her, right? Like my mom,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. We want to be in that.
Yes.
We want to raise that next generation, because our parents did the work of taking, my parents at least, and a lot of people in our generation, they did the work of taking physical violence out of the home, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
huge in terms of
Yeah.
human evolution and consciousness. And I believe that our generation is here to take emotional, psychological violence, sexual violence out of the home. And we can do that by
Mm-hmm.
like standing in ourselves, and then raising children from that place, fearless and empowered and connected to our sexuality.
Oh, thank you. It's a powerful note to end on.
That's right. Oh, so good.
Yes. Thanks so much for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I love your stories every time.
Yeah. Is there something that was like that stood out for you in that whole?
Mm. So many things. I'm looking forward to, so I always go back through and I listen to the whole, like I take a few days or a few weeks and go back and listen to the whole episode again and, take out the clanging on the floor from my toddler upstairs or whatever background noise is happening. So I'm really looking forward to this one because there were a lot of little nuggets in there I want to look at. I want to look at the book you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, Unbound.
Mm-hmm.
I got to check that out. And yeah, there were a few pieces I want to look back on that just make me want to investigate further into my own life. That's really, there's a big invitation there, I feel, to the work of centering your own pleasure. Like we talk about that a lot, but it's become sort of just like a thing you say. Like, what does that actually mean? And what does it mean when when we're not just constantly in service to someone else's pleasure, and even just in service to children, which I love and is like such an awesome part of my life. But what are the other things? And yeah, I feel like I'm saying it way too simply because it's a really big piece. But I just want to like sit and reflect on that for a little bit.
Yeah.
Think about where that wants to take me.
Yeah. And not only taking time away from our life to center pleasure, but centering pleasure in our journey, right? Like if we're lying in bed nursing, can we love it? Right? We can be busy,
Yes.
or we could be looking at our phone, or we could be distracted, or we could be worrying or thinking about things. But can we like be in the like head sniffing, like intoxicating, like womb clenching, like, oh, I love my baby. I love my baby, right? Just like, oh, I made this. I'm so powerful. I made life, right? It's like,
And maybe that's pleasure, right? Is being in this moment.
Yeah.
Maybe that is pleasure rather than looking for the next one. That's a lot of parenting little children is kind of monotonous. Like I don't so much enjoy going to the park. It's not my favorite.
Indeed.
But my 3-year-old loves the park.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, how many minutes do I have to sit here? Like that I could be in that space or in this moment, right? Where I'm usually cuddling the tiny baby and I could be sniffing her little head and looking at how much joy the toddler's getting at the park because like maybe that's pleasure because these are the good old days, right? These are the times when we're going to look back and be like, remember when they were tiny and the house was a gong show? So that's what I try to, my husband's like, I don't know if you're right. He's not super convinced right now, but I'm like, yeah, these are the days. So I'm going to try to sit in the moments, actually in the moments.
Yeah, and when we're rooted in our bodies in those moments, and when we've done the work to clear out the trauma and the pain, the body feels so good in the present.
Yeah.
It feels so good.
It's true.
It's like womb clenchingly, like pussy, like
Yeah,
wigglingly,
clenching.
like oh. I'm not saying I'm there all the time. Not by a long shot. A lot of the time, like sometimes I'm fine and I'm just like la la la, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm frustrated, right? But like,
yeah,
practice. It's just a practice, just like being patient with our kids. But I've always said, like, when I was in the shit of things, like the worst, like the stuff that I cover in my memoir book, where it's just like in the heavy, deep stuff of sexual healing and sexual trauma. In those days, I remember really getting the lesson, like you can be in pain or you can be in presence. And I went to yoga and I went to meditation, and it was like sitting still in meditation was not compelling enough to keep me out of worry. It was not compelling enough to keep the invasive thoughts from out of my head. I had to center into pleasure to combat it. There was no combating the craziness that was in my brain and like wrestling it into submission, and like, you know, maybe now I would say like, well, just give it space to be. And I've been giving it lots of space to be. It was running my life, right? At some point I had to go like, enough's enough. Like we're focusing on feeling good. And I do believe it's a balance of the two. But being in that place, like pleasure, and having a really like vivid, strong, embodied, anchored, like an anchor where you go like, oh, this is my body and pleasure. You just wipe out all sorts of little worries and niggling things. And Kasha from the Unbound, again, she, you know, we teach very similar things in a lot of ways. And she talks about cooking our emotions, right? Like our worry, we can cook it with pleasure, and then it's edible and delectable. Our anxiety, we can cook it with pleasure, just like bring a little bit of that pleasure in, and then it changes and it becomes this miraculous thing. Just like if we're anxious about something, well, actually anxiousness is actually excitement, right? So if we just feel like, oh, anxiousness plus pleasure is excitement, ooh, right? And then we can enjoy all the sensations, right? Worry is just like your brain being really good at problem solving, stuck in a fear state. So you can work with it.
Yeah.
but pleasure is the key.
So many pieces. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Hey, so tell me, how can people contact you? What sort of offerings do you have out in the world, and how can they
Oh yeah.
work with you or contact you?
Oh, I mean, I am so pleased and blissed out with the Joygasmic Birth Blueprint. That's my new baby that's come out of this experience, and that's available at joygasm.me/birth. If you go to just joygasm.me, there's like a freebie which gives you, some of the exercises and looking into your fears and your best birth and preventative birth care, stuff like that. And creating a birth map, so we have an idea of like what are all the territories, so how you would handle different things, because it makes us so versatile. And also the audio that I mentioned, that orgasmic birth brain training track is there as well.
I'll have to put a link to that.
Yeah, and then I've got a link tree that has like all the little different pieces as well, so I'll make sure you get that, and it can go in the show notes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for
Thank you.
all you have out there and sharing your story.
Yeah. Thanks so much for holding the beautiful space for it. I really appreciate it and I enjoy sharing today.
Thanks for listening. You can head to Instagram and birth.throughtheveil to see birth pictures or just pictures from each episode. The show notes have links and more ways to connect, along with the link to submit your birth story. I would love to hear it. New episodes of Through the Veil come out every other Tuesday. You can follow, subscribe, share, rate, and review this podcast to be in support. Until next time.